Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. We just want to get right into this conversation here today. Eagles fans know our guest as the former cornerback for the Eagles from 1996 through 2004. NFL fans know this man as the Executive Vice President for Football Operations. It's Troy Vincent. Troy, thank you so much for stopping by.
Joe, thanks for having me. And always looking forward to having a nice, civil conversation with the Eagle faithful nation.
Absolutely. And you were such a memorable part of, especially those early years of Andy Reid. You played for the Eagles the longest in your career. What about your time with the Eagles stands out to you?
It was a special place in particular. I was back home, just a few miles down the road from where I went to high school, born and raised, both my wife Tommy and I in Trenton, New Jersey. But just being home, having the opportunity as a free agent to come back home and play in front of the folks that I went to school with, my grandparents, my parents, and just being part of, as I would say, an extended community, a community that I grew up in, that I was part of, that I was the fabric of, frankly, the community that raised me. So that part was special to me. And then coming back home, because at the time, Ray Rose was the head coach. Emmett Thomas was the defensive coordinator. But being able to come back home, play for Ray, play under Emmett Thomas's leadership and his direction, because not only was he my defensive coordinator, he also was my position coach. So it was just a special time. And then transitioning over to Coach Reid and Jim Johnson. And it was just fun. You know, once we learned how to win, Andy put some pieces in place with Donovan, Westbrook, Deuce. Like we just became a dynamic team, both offensively and defensively, and we competed every year. You know, playing alongside Bobby Taylor, Brian Dawkins. Most don't remember during that time. It was just we had a lot of good football players. And Jeffrey, I must say, I don't have an opportunity to share this publicly a lot, but you know, just his leadership. He's a football first club owner. And it's about the team, it's about the players, it's about the city. But giving me the opportunity to come and represent, you know, Eagle Nation for the time period that I was there, it was just wonderful, wonderful time and experience during my professional career.
Absolutely. And Eagles fans, again, remember you very well. And I think one of the things that stands out as well is there's a certain appreciation for tough play in Philly that made fans really appreciate the kind of defense that you played, especially, I grew up watching you, but I mostly remember the Andy Reid, Jim Johnson years. Was that sense of appreciation for tough play something that you got a sense of while you were here?
It was before I actually arrived as an Eagle. Now, growing up down in Lower Bucks, I grew up watching the Buddy Ryan era. So with Reggie and Eric and Clyde, like that whole era, they were very dominant defensively. Didn't result in a lot of playoff wins, but it created a brand and a style of play, a culture that I believe embraced the city. Like, frankly, it embraced that whole tri-state area. Then having the opportunity, fast forward, after college, 4 years in Miami, becoming a free agent, you knew, and under Ray Rhodes, great defensive mind, Emmett Thomas, putting some pieces together, Jeremiah Trotter, Hugh Douglas, Carlos Edmonds, Brian Dawkins, Tim Hawk, we gelled, and we just said, okay, how do we become better than the old era? Getting off the field on third down. It was tough play, but the culture was set. So I always had a visual, because I grew up in the area, what good defenses look, what they were. And when we got a chance to now put the uniform on, what I really loved about playing in Philly was you had to show up every day. There was no excuses. Fans don't want it. Either you won, you lost, and then you give them you just tell the truth. You be completely transparent. Don't sugarcoat anything. Either I played well, didn't play well, we didn't play well enough to win today. Period. No passing the buck. And there's an appreciation for that. No fluff. You either got the job done or you didn't. And also, you all, the fans, saw you're going to get in somebody's face, you're going to bring the fight to somebody, or somebody's going to bring the fight with you. And we lived off of Doc's mantra of two people going to enter this vet stadium today. There's going to be two teams that enter, but one going to leave victorious. And Brian used to say that every single game, an hour or two prior to kickoff. Two going to enter, one going to leave. And there was one way to play and one way only to play. It was seek and destroy, win the football game. So there was a great appreciation for just style of play prior to myself actually putting on the Philadelphia Eagles uniform.
Absolutely. And that's certainly, again, a hallmark of Eagles play and certainly what fans expect at this point. You're now, at this point, you're celebrating 10 years this year of your role as executive vice president of football operations for the league. You started in the league offices a little bit before that. You've held some other roles. Transitioning from the field to the offices, was there anything that surprised you?
Yes. And what is that? It is, there is a difference between, and you had to learn that. So it was a learning experience. What actually is taking place in the dynamics of the 32 clubs? What happens on the first floor, second floor? What's happening in that local market? In some cases, is much differently than the assumption or what may be perceived here in the office, in particular here in New York. And being able to bridge the two, like, no, this is happening and we must work around the club schedule. We work for the clubs. We support the clubs. But all of the, and I would just say sport, the things that you learn in sport, all of those characteristics carried over into the real world, for me, the corporate world, teamwork, communication, integrity, all of those things that you learn in sport, in particular football, that team, they all came right on over. And it was I don't want to say a smooth transition, but it was a transition that allowed me to go from, as we would say, the gridiron to the boardroom with not a lot of hiccups. So there was just a few slight adjustments in my learnings that I just had to learn and just get accustomed to language, how we communicate here corporately. A lot of times it's paper, PowerPoint, and on the field, there's a lot of verbal communication, long days as a player, watching video, and having your staff members or your colleagues be accustomed to long meetings. And that's okay, because that was the world I came from.
It's interesting seeing how the on the field stuff can transition to that off the field stuff, and just how much of a team the NFL as an organization tends to operate as much as the teams that make it up. And one of the things that actually kind of factors into that, and this also is something that you oversee as a part of your role as executive vice president of football operations. When you actually look at it, there are actually three teams on the field, right? So you have the home team, you have the visiting team, and a team that people who are outside of that bubble don't often think about as a team is the officiating crew. And they tend to operate as they tend to operate as a team as well. And that's something that I actually got a little bit familiar with as I was refereeing some high school games a few years ago. Can you speak to that element to it? Because, I mean, the officiating crew reports into you. How do the officials prepare as though they're a team on the field?
Well, Joe, if you can, so I can for the viewers. So I like to just share a few areas that I am responsible for. Player operation, that's past, present, and future. Player programs. You just referenced officiating led by Perry Fuel. Player operations led by Tracy Pearlman. Game ops, Don Aponte. our business strategy, Kimberly Fields, and now Stephanie Kwok overseeing our flag efforts, but officiating, which was so interesting as I entered into my new role during 10 years ago was okay. I used to be the individual in the locker room that gave the officiating report to the players, head
Mhm.
coach, whether it was Coach Reed, and when I was in Buffalo or Miami, it was, and even in my short stint in Washington, I was the individual that was assigned to give an officiating report. Here's how this referee calls things in particular. Here's how the side judge, back judge. They'll let you go with this. In this particular crew, you're probably not going to get away with this. And now come full circle. Now I'm part of a leadership team that is overseeing officiating. One of the things I find out how remarkable these men and women are, how accurate they are real time without any machine or technology assisting or aiding, just how accurate they are real time. And just one of the things that we've just been focused on really I would just say the last 10 years, but the last 5 years in particular, with the assistance of the competition committee, is crew consistency. I think the fans, the players, that is what everyone is looking for, is the consistency. So they are the third team. We call them the 33rd team, but they are the third team on the field to what? To administer, to maintain, as I would say, controlled chaos, to they're responsible for game flow, not always perfect, but they're right up under perfection, striving for perfection, but right. But so the focus of crew consistency, crew 1 to crew 17, is what we are striving for year in and year out throughout the week. That it doesn't matter what game window, whether it's 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whether it's Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Friday, that there's consistency in the way that foul is called or not called.
Mhm. Absolutely. And certainly, I think that that speaks to a lot of desires of fans because unfortunately, when an official makes an error, it's more impactful sometimes on the game than if a player makes an error
Yes.
or a player makes a mistake.
I would say
So,
this, not to cut you off, but there is there's a, there's not a lot of tolerance for, okay, the player may drop a pass, what you and I would consider, or most fans would consider, an elementary catch or an elementary tackle or something that should be, man, how did he miss that? But if an official misses a holding call or calls a DPI, it is like they should be gone. What is going on with officiating? Like there's very little tolerance. So they've like the officials over time have been, in any sport, not just football, they're like the common enemy. Because if the call is to the team that you're rooting for, you're okay with it. But if you're on the opposite sideline and you didn't, the call worked against or was against the club that you're cheering, you get a different outcome from the fan.
absolutely. Yeah. And certainly, I mean, we can. So there's a saying where, like, if you're blaming the officials for the loss of the game, most of the time that's just a cop out
Yes.
because, again, as you pointed out, and as it's pointed out on the NFL's website, officials are right 98.9% of the time. It's just getting that extra 1.1% sometimes that can be a challenge. What what steps do you think, and especially there's been some changes in the leadership crew of the officiating department, what are you looking forward to seeing out of the officiating crew that might help get officials that extra 1.1% accuracy? I'm certainly no game's going to be called perfectly, but getting closer to that perfect
Well,
game.
excellent question. And it's something I talk about often. We talk about our officiating improvement plan. Talk about that often every year. We're no differently than the club. Every year you're looking to possibly tweak the roster just a little bit. You may, like the club, you're looking, hey, we can probably upgrade here. You got a player here that may be transitioning out, whether it's retirement. And with technology, replay assist, we're now going into our fourth season with replay assist. I believe with the integration of technology, and what we currently see with the on-field officials. We're getting to that place where we could, what was replay for? To correct the clear and obvious mistake. We don't definitely we ever want to get to a place where I would never recommend to the membership to ever get to a place where the game is being officiated from the sky. No, the game is played on the field, and that's where it should be officiated. But where we can aid and replay assist, this allows us to get in and work with the referees on administrative errors, in particular, some fouls where it's clear and obvious. We can pick that up very quickly to assist in aiding in making sure the play and the fouls called correctly to keep the game moving. So I think those are the additional training, just like the player. Reps matter. Reps matter during the offseason, reps matter during preseason, and then it's game day. So in just increasing our touch points, the young talent that's coming in, that group, that I would say that roster, that pipeline is increasing to both men and women. You got replay officials, you got replay assistants. So the whole universe of officiating has evolved through time.
Absolutely. You mentioned replay assist and the advent that that has had. And one of the things that's changing over the course of this upcoming year, this was initially reported at the annual meeting, the replay assistant will now be able to correct certain calls that are on the field, certain clear and obvious things like you alluded to, particularly roughing the passer and intentional grounding if there's something objectively wrong with calling that and it should not have actually been called. When I heard this report, I remember a few years ago, the NFL tried replay review with pass interference calls. And you were on the record, he said that the league failed in that. What has the league learned? What have you learned about trying that, not succeeding that's going to help in the implementation of the replay review of these particular fouls?
So here we always say crawl, walk, jog. And we're going into our fourth year of replay assist. We, on the average, we're right around correcting around about 100 calls per year. There's a subjective part and an objective part of the foul. There's certain elements we just want to stay away from. So every year, as we see, because every foul also has an administrative time kind of stamped to it. There's just certain elements of the foul that you just want to stay away from. So this year, when we think about hitting the runner out of bounds, was his foot in, was his foot out? We can see whether that second foot was actually out of bounds. So that is something that we got 3 elements this year that you alluded to that we will be expanding replay assist. One is the runner out of bounds, hitting the runner out of bounds. The second is in the roughing the passer category, but only when it pertains to was there contact, forcible contact to the neck or head area. Not the other elements of body weight or hitting below the knee. Those aren't reviewable. Those aren't in the category of replay assist. Very, very important to keep that in mind. Now, some would say, well, why wouldn't you do all of them? We may get there, but this year we can see it. Our game techs can see it very quickly, clearly. Was there actually contact to the head or neck area? Was it forcible? And then the third area of expansion was the intentional ground. And what we've learned is from a committee, there's so many elements that are involved because when you think about the white hat, the referee, he's looking and he's monitoring the QB. Is he in pocket, out of the pocket? Not thinking because his eyes goes from here and it goes down to where is he at in relationship to the pocket? Did the ball actually reach the line of scrimmage? Was there a receiver in the vicinity? So we believe that we can assist in those areas to clean that up, and particularly that intentional ground. That's a long administrative. That foul usually takes, when we look at and we audit how long that foul is being administered, that can get up there. So we feel like we can get involved with assisting the white hat and getting some of those cleaned up.
Absolutely. And that's certainly important too. Um, Again, objectively, you talked about refs getting repetitions, and that's kind of where they're at right now. They're going through their own practices. They're
And that's all
ultimately
positions,
they're going to
Joe.
go out and they're going to get uh they're going to go to training camps. They're going to go to preseason games. They're going to get back into that groove. The Probably one of the most controversial rules changes, which is something else that you have a hand in because you have a seat on the competition committee, non-voting, but you have a seat there, is the hip drop tackle, which was a change that was made for safety. And your colleague Jeff Miller indicated that it's 20 times more likely to result in injury, and that's certainly a very good reason to remove it. But there was some question surrounding, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that consistency thing. What was the thought process behind making it enforceable on the field versus simply just finding it out of existence? And then how do you also get the reps for officials for a play that's going to be illegal but might not actually be done for safety reasons during those times when they're trying to get those reps in?
So good. Again, another excellent question. The hip drop tackle, something that we've been studying. And when I say we, that is myself, John Runyon, former Eagle. So he's my colleague in the compliance area. People say, John Runyon, compliance? Yes. One of the toughest teammates I ever played with, toughest guys, great ball player. So he was part of that run with me. But him and I, we work daily in this particular area around player safety and then the compliance aspect, the accountability, both on the field accountability. So when we think about the hip drop was birthed out of, as we would call, the hawk tackle. So you go back a decade, and we were a league and a sport that was battling head injuries. And how do you get the head out of the game? You'll never completely take it out of the game, but how do you minimize, or we would say, how do I remove the unnecessary risk? So when we started in Seattle, Coach Carroll introduced this hawk tackle. That is kind of getting the head and the body behind the ball carrier, which is tough, difficult. Never was taught that way. I was always taught, most of us in my era, get head across the bow, bite the ball, so on and so forth. Watching the evolution of this tackle over the last 3 years, and to, as Jeff Miller alluded to, 20 to 25 time injury rate, as a steward of the game, you couldn't no longer ignore it because it was something, a form of tackle that was showing up at the collegiate level, high school level, and more every weekend at our level. What is the hip drop tackle and the mechanics of it? If you think about the old Roy Williams horse collar, all of the mechanics of the horse collar, just, grabbing the nameplate, pulling down, the hip drop tackle looks very similar. There's just no grabbing of the nameplate. It is grabbing around the waist area. It is swiveling and then unweighting the defender, unweighting, and that's important. You got those three elements: the unweighting of his body on the back of the leg of the runner. Again, grab, swivel, unweight. Now, again, we've been challenged. It wasn't when we first started talking about it. This is Joe, and I must read. This is not taking out the hustle tackle. This is not taking out, chasing him down, trying to get him down by any means necessary. This is not that. You need all three of these elements for it to be a foul. Now, people say, well, how do you officiate? No differently than the use of helmet. The last 3 seasons, it wasn't a foul. So it was just a phone call during the week to a player or to a coach to say, hey, I need you to adjust. We just can't. So there was no accountability. And this was sending people to the sidelines, like ending your season, 20 to 25x injury rate. We needed a foul on the books to either call it real time or so that we can pick it up during the week because it's happening more frequently. So again, grab, swivel, unweighting. And when he unweights, when he drops that ass or that butt on the back of the leg, it's tearing the leg up, tearing knees up, high ankle sprain, breaking foots. It's causing significant damage. But there was no rule in place to let, because we wanted to study it to make sure that we were clear. Now I would say this: I played with some great tacklers throughout my career. Miami, Brian Dawkins, Lewis Oliver, John Offadaw. Come to Philly, and Brian Dawkins, great tackler. Jeremiah Trotter, great tackler. Hugh Douglas, great tackler. I played with some great tacklers. In Buffalo, London Fletcher, Takeo Spikes, Lawyer Malloy. I have never seen any of these defenders tackle someone in this manner. So I'm going to repeat that. Let's just take, for Philly fans, let's just take Doc. Let's just take Trotter. Let's just take Hugh Douglas as some of the best defenders that have ever wore that uniform. We can go Reggie Clark. We can go on Seth Joyner, Eric Allen. None of these men have ever tackled a runner in this manner. So that's why we had to go. We needed something on the books to clean it up. This doesn't belong in the sport. We're not trying to take the physicality away, but this was something that was an evolution of the hawk tackle that has caused serious, serious injuries to the players.
And I appreciate that insight. Certainly, that's important insight to that, and why that play is no longer allowed in the field of play. So I appreciate you expanding on that and explaining the history of this particular tackle. So Troy, I want to move as well. You have a hand in flag football. You alluded to that. Flag football also is a part of your operations team. And flag football in 4 years is going to have a real boon with it as an Olympic sport, which is going to be for the first time that football, as we know it as Americans, is going to be in the Olympics. What does that say about the growth of flag football, especially internationally, that it's going to have this kind of recognition for fans across the world?
Joe, I think it's a boost for the game and the sport of football, just the overall sport of football. Just another version. Just doesn't this doesn't eliminate tackle. This is just another form and another option for both men and women to play. I've been super excited about the evolution and the growth of flag football. Why? Because we're now given a population, just say young, I'm going to just speak specifically to young ladies. Now young ladies have an opportunity that I had. And what is that? To play varsity ball at the high school level, where, we got 11 states to date that have sanctioned girls varsity flag. Is recognized as a varsity sport. In the coming months, the NC2A we're in our application stage of applying for women's flag being an emerging sport at the collegiate level. I want you to think about that. Each of us as young boys, man, we could dream from the time that we can understand what this pigskin, what this ball can do for me. Man, I can play youth ball. I can play high school ball. I can go earn a scholarship and play college ball. I can play at the professional level. And now, you alluded to LA 28, the Olympics. I can now go rep my country. It has just been phenomenal to see the growth. These young ladies, and what's so important, the young ladies are shaping the game of the way. They're not changing rules. They don't want rules change, but they're making it their own. And to be part of a team, along with many others in our organization, bringing this to life, to see young ladies, young girls. I have 2 young girls myself. They didn't have that opportunity. To have they're skillful, they're excited. You look at the number of, almost 20 million people playing flag across the world. and it's only growing. I just think it's, Philly has done, Jeffrey, through the leadership of Jeffrey and Don, have done a wonderful job of working with the Pennsylvania Intercollegiate Athletic Association on advancing the efforts in the state of Pennsylvania to bring that to pass in the state. So I just think, man, it's why is it important? I always say there's three things. It's affordable, it's accessible, and it's all inclusive. When you have those three elements, man, let's not price families out of our sport. It's accessible. I don't need a special venue to play it. I can play it in a parking lot, on the street. I don't need a big old venue to go out and play. And then it's all inclusive. There is a place for everybody. Doesn't matter your color, your gender. It doesn't matter your body type. Man, there's a place in ball for you. When we say football for all, flag allows us to truly represent that. So I mean, this is one of the more things I'm most excited about because it's really advancing our sport worldwide.
Awesome. Yeah, and certainly I got to see that excitement firsthand right around Memorial Day weekend with the first time that a girls flag football tournament was part of the Big 33,
Yes, yes,
the big high
yes,
school, the
yes.
Super Bowl of high school sports as they call it. Troy, I want to bring it to a close here with the Eagles and going back to your time there. And you alluded to Jeffrey Lurie a couple of times during the course of this interview. And Jeffrey Lurie is celebrating 30 years of ownership of the Philadelphia Eagles this year. Was there a particular memory or story that stands out to you of him, just whether it was from your time in Philly, your time in the league offices, anywhere that stands out to you that's typifying of who he is and his leadership style over the course of the last 30 years?
I don't have one. I just have many over that time period. And one, congratulations, Jeffrey, for 30 years. Hell of an owner. You do it right. I don't have one moment, but I could say this. Now seeing Jeffrey once, I'm being in the room with him from my first initial call when we talked about myself joining the Philadelphia Eagles, myself and the Bodleys. Jeffrey has been the same man from 1995 in my first initial conversation to today, 2024. He's a leader, loves the game. More importantly, Jeffrey was always we would say a player's owner, where he cared about the men in the locker room and the things that were most important to the men in the locker room. He embraced that. And he made sure that the not only the players, but the coaches, we had what we needed to perform. Took things away that was kind of, I remember Connie Dawkins and my wife Tommy, speaking to him about, hey, parking, just some little things that matter to the families. He's just always embraced that. I watch him today, at our annual meetings, and he's still the same. Football first. While we're here, the competitive aspect of our game, and then about what are we doing in the community. How are we spreading, allowing Jermaine Mayberry, that may be a name in the past, to live out his dreams about eyeglasses and the iMobile, but allowing him to live that dream of putting eyeglasses and they're still doing the playground. Like he was so community oriented, but it was always through the player. So I commend him because that's not always the case when you hear other stories about other experiences around the league, but Jeffrey has been steadfast. That whole organization has just been steadfast throughout the years and really the partnership with the players. So there's an expectation to win. Why? Because Jeffrey's removed all of the other elements of what people would think could be barriers to me having a clean mind or me being ready to come to play. He's removed all of that. So kudos to what he's done in his leadership style and his care for the players.
Absolutely. Well, Troy, it was a real pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your undoubtedly busy schedule Please enjoy the deep off season and please feel free to come back on anytime because we're happy to have you.
But thanks for having me. Fly, Eagles, fly.
Fly, Eagles, fly. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning into the Bird's Nest podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts: SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app. And you can also find us at birdsnestmedia.com for additional coverage. If you feel so inclined to support us and more endeavors like this in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below, or again at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.